When we speak of ISB and its impact on students, the one word that stands out is transformation. We welcome bright young minds to the school, see them graduate with flying colors, and go on to accomplish some incredible things. He's an Indian Administrative Service Officer with a vision of driving impactful governance and implementing innovative, community-focused solutions. What sets him apart is his unique journey. An IITian who honed his management skills with the PGP at ISB before embarking on a highly acclaimed career in the civil services. He has combined analytical rigor with administrative acumen in key areas such as water conservation, industrial growth, and municipal governance, earning recognition for transformative policies and citizen-centric administration. His leadership in Rajanna Sircilla and Siddipet districts of Telangana was marked by initiatives that improved livelihoods and strengthened local economies. His commitment to public service has been recognized at the highest levels. Among other honors, he is a two-time recipient of the Prime Minister's Award for Excellence in Public Administration, reflecting his dedication to driving meaningful, scalable impact in governance. This two-time award is a very rare feat for any civil servant. Join me in conversation with D. Krishna Bhaskar from the PGP class of 2009, currently the Chairman and Managing Director of TG TRANSCO and Special Secretary to the Deputy Chief Minister of Telangana. Krishna, it's such a pleasure to be here. And thank you for inviting us and hosting us. When we think of our alumni, they sort of exemplify impact, success in different walks of life. But in you, there is a very unique story, which is that you're, I think, the first alum of ISB who came in to ISB, post ISB, chose to write the UPSC exams, which is an aspiration for millions of Indians. And at least in the case of ISB, till you graduated in 2009, nobody had done that post ISB. And then you got into the IPS first instance, police service, and then subsequently you again went into the IAS. Tell us a little bit of, what made you take this plunge post ISB?
I'd already worked before coming to ISB. I'd been there. I didn't want to give the UPSC because someone in family was already in that, and I was actively avoiding it.
Yeah.
That's when I started thinking about it. And then giving the UPSC itself is, I don't know, it's a different story and all. It's not, especially when you finished a degree from ISB. You use all sorts of mental muscles which you never thought existed in the first place.
Yeah.
It's a different form of learning. It's a different pedagogy. It's a different, I would say, path, completely different path. ISB is arguably, or the MBA path is arguably, figuring out how fast you can drive on a Formula One. You're given a good road, a good car, it's your skill set.
Yeah.
But here, sometimes there's no road in the first place. You have to figure out what kind of JCP you use. You have to figure out how to use the JCP. What if the JCP breaks down midway? It's a completely different experience. And sometimes you figure out you shouldn't climb a road. You shouldn't go on the road. There's a mountain. Go climb the mountain, come down. It's faster, though it takes you 3 days.
So that's a better way to sort of...
So everything is out in the open. You suddenly start missing the structure which used to curse in your MBA. You used to get too much structure. You used to get angry. I remember, people used to roll their eyes when you talked about frameworks. And here I found myself 3 months later thirsting for frameworks. Give me something.
There was none.
Nothing. You have to make your own framework.
Yeah.
So then I did that, and I went through that process. And arguably, giving the UPSC itself is a learning process. You learn so much.
So tell me, but you got the police service. Again, it's something it's very coveted. But you clearly, you underwent the training, but you said this is not and what was your thought in terms of trying to take the exam again? Because it's also about repeating the whole thing again, right?
So there are two things here. One is I never said this in public while preparation.
Okay.
But I really wanted to get into the IAS.
Okay.
Because it's so coveted and the competition is fierce. I thought it was immodest to say that's only where I want to go. But that's where I wanted to be. And sure, if I couldn't make it to the IAS, I would have gone elsewhere and tried my best to figure out. And I'm sure I would have, added value in my own sense and appreciated the organization. But this is what I wanted to do. And when I got into the IPS, I missed the IAS by about 4 marks. It was actually pretty heartbreaking. My rank was 9-0, and I think the IAS closed at somewhere between in the mid 80s somewhere. So I was like 3-4 ranks away. In terms of marks, I was 3 marks away, I think. But there was a silver lining in it. I don't know if you'll call it a silver lining. Now, because I was right at the top of the IPS. I was second in my batch for the IPS.
Okay.
So I was allowed to choose my cadre. So I chose the then Andhra Pradesh cadre. So I trained in this cadre. I trained in NPA. I served in Adilabad. And in those times, we used to have Maoist problems, 2013 and 12. Now it's come down. So I went on some of, I can't tell you more about what I did, but I had exposure which otherwise I wouldn't have had.
On the field.
I was on the field.
Yeah.
I was on the field as a soldier there. But the thing is, what happened the next time I gave the exam was, this time luckily, my first rank, my rank was 90, I got rid of the 0. And luckily, I was again on top of the list for the Andhra Pradesh, people who gave from Andhra Pradesh. So I was able to choose my cadre again. So I got back the same cadre. So I did both cadre, I came back to the same cadre. This time I went elsewhere for training. But I must say that, I'm very grateful to all my mentors and my guides in the police service, especially those at the cutting edge, those we call ustads. We have ASIs and constables who are extremely harsh.
Drill ustads and
they're very harsh, and the dynamic is very well known.
Yeah.
They may report you later in life, but right now they're your boss. And they're very hard on you. The harder they are on you, the more gratitude you feel in retrospect. And
almost like they shape you to who you become.
They physically, mentally, the kind of toughness. I remember I went to ITBP, Indo-Tibetan Border Police.
Yeah.
We were asked to scale a sheer cliff, and the cliff was about 100 feet. It was very difficult because until then we had only been training in sanitized environments, with obstacles and all.
Yeah.
This is an actual cliff. And somewhere midway through the cliff, I lost it. I figured that there were people right below. If I fell down, I'll break my neck in an instant. And I had my ustad 50 feet above. And he was saying something very humorous. नीचे भी जाना तो उतना ही है, ऊपर भी उतना ही है, तो ऊपर आ ही जाना.
Or a great philosophical sort of.
Then if you're making the effort, of course, I didn't bother to tell him going down is gravity, going up is against gravity. And I remember I struggled to reach those last 50 feet, 100 or 110 feet. And at some point of time, I remember my hands gave way.
Yeah.
So they, through the tiredness, exhaustion, they weren't moving. So his answer, I told him, like, Ustad ji, मेरे से नहीं हो रहा है, आप ना मुझे खींच लीजिए. He said, ना कोई नहीं, रुको 10 मिनट के लिए, फिर ऊपर. He wasn't in any position to give me an inch.
Yeah.
And he ensured that I made my way right up there. And I feel very grateful for it because it's a memory you keep with you.
Yeah.
It's a standard you set in your mind.
It's also an accomplishment that you will forever treasure. It's yours.
Absolutely. It's yours. Nobody helped you and it's yours. So these are the kind of experiences which are irreplicable. You can't have them anywhere else.
Yeah.
And to that extent, I take my hat off to them. They really designed a fantastic course for training.
Lovely. I mean, I can go on in terms of, this is so fascinating in terms of, the training and how this is, as you said, in terms of it helps you get your bearing in life, quite literally and sort of, otherwise as well. I do want to ask you this in terms of, you have multiple charges typically in your service. You currently have more than one charge.
I hold 2 charges, right?
Yeah. So we are sitting in one of your offices, but you also have an additional charge. Or this is the additional charge. I don't know which way it was.
This is my main charge. My additional charge. In fact, you can see right there in the building there. That's the secretariat.
Yeah. So tell us what is the additional charge?
First of all, it is usually not the norm to have additional charges.
Okay.
What has happened here is, in my case, government has created a hitherto non-existent post.
Okay.
It's called the Special Secretary to Deputy CM, the head of staff for the Deputy Chief Minister.
It's like the chief of staff in some sense.
Chief of staff. So it's a chief of staff role.
Yeah.
So for the departments of finance, planning and energy, there is various administrative matters to which I tend to. That was my main charge last year. Now it is my additional charge. So that involves a much higher level sort of analysis where you speak to other departments. Naturally, some departments sometimes are not on the same page. You try to figure out where there could be a commonality, how you could take it forward. I would say that is very stratospheric. And this is very petrichorish. Like when rain falls on, you see, your legs are on the ground.
There's a touch and feel that
you touch, you feel, and you get feedback as well. In my case, if I don't do my job well, I literally get an electric shock.
Yeah. And a barrage of phone calls, I'm sure.
No, they've gone beyond phone calls.
In terms of management education and civil service, it's not straightforward or there's no alignment. At least the popular perception is. But you clearly are a product who's of a school like ISB and now in civil service. What are some of the things that you feel have you benefited from, let's say, a classroom or otherwise at ISB that you're
Definitely. So I remember one thing, and we were sitting for a CAS session just before placements. Mr. Menon was around there.
Yes.
And then he said, listen guys, I have only one thing to tell you. You mug up all the frameworks you want to in the world. But the key is the framework should help you and you shouldn't help the framework, which is, it is not your job to publicize a BCG matrix or a GE McKinsey matrix. It is their job to help you in your work. Get that causality right. And therefore, when you think things through, you need not tell people and shout in their face, I'm using a BCG matrix. No, you don't need to. You can just say, I'm going to convert, I'm going to make a 2x2 matrix, and I'll divide companies based on their growth and their current position. That's enough. You don't need to put it,
don't be explicit about it.
Don't be explicit about it. And I thought that was great advice. And that's advice I use today to wherever possible. Sometimes, of course, you can't follow it. To the extent I can, I try to follow it. Because the point of a framework is to sift through common sense for you and structure matters for you.
Yeah.
And if you allow that to happen, I keep that in mind a lot. I remember a lot of women from my study group. One of my study group mates is now a professor at ISB. And I remember in the group, she was the one who was most vocal, Purnima.
Yeah.
So I remember, we were doing a course on, I think it was organizational behavior. And what we never realized was we never implemented one single principle we learnt in the class to our own internal squabbles in our study group. in the group. So I think that bridge, which from understanding a concept or something to actually applying it in real life, is a very difficult bridge to cross. And much later in life, after multiple rounds of cogitation, thinking about it, you figure out this is where it applies. So that was a big takeaway for me, that it's not as simple as that part in the matrix where the knowledge of how to use a helicopter can be just drilled into your head and it's not. There's a lot of static friction here you have to go through before you find your version of that concept that works for you in real life. And that I think I learned at ISB. So I chose to go full on quant in my second part. I chose all the tough quant ones, financial engineering, operations research, all this stuff. So these actually required us to go through, sit through the night, figure out.
Yeah.
And that actually opened up to me, especially in those areas, how difficult research can be. So I started appreciating where the prof came from. I started appreciating how defensive research was. Every line, you have to presume that 100 people attack you for it. And therefore, you have to craft your line appropriately. And government is not that very different. When you give out a press release, every line, you presume people are going to attack you for it.
People are going to dissect it in multiple...
So you have your... just like a professor has his sources ready, you have your own sources ready. Just like an academic researcher has their own, future courses of collaboration ready. I have my future course. So I realized in a very weird way that research is so very, very similar to public service. In the sense, when you deal with a large body of stakeholders, there is game theory involved. You start second guessing what they think. You start second guessing what you think.
Literally 2 steps ahead.
2-3 steps ahead. The masters think 10 steps ahead. Mortals like us think lesser. But it's very similar. And that I think was a good experience.
No, it's so lovely because, oftentimes, and this is something that came up in a conversation recently about, as a school which has pioneered research, at least emphasized on, research and focus on research in India. For us, it's also about how do we get decision makers, senior folk.
I can say that being exposed to that cutting edge research and very deep research at that, not the one airy-fairy kind of research which may happen in some places, because ISB is serious about it. I could see the trouble the faculty took, anyone I worked with, into drafting any sentence that had to be iron tight, iron cast. And that stayed with me.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing which I'll leave you with ISB time, come on, it was 2009. And from September 2008 to April 2009, everybody was in tension.
That's true.
And that included people, the students, right till the dean, when Ajit took over. I remember, in one of our sessions, he was trying to be as nice to us as possible, but people asked hard questions. And I said, listen guys, I've used all the goodwill I've built up in my life just for you guys. I don't have any left. And that was a very stark moment because it was a tough time.
But also very open, honest.
Very open, honest. And that was taken very well by the class.
Yeah.
The class suddenly understood where it came from. It was not, they had problems, no doubt. But somebody else was putting their reputation and their goodwill on the line for them.
Yeah.
That mattered a lot.
Yeah.
And that somehow got us closer. And finally, they made it through. People from Unai are doing great now. But they didn't know it in that point of time. And, that again was a great platform to understand that stress can affect you, but it need not affect you permanently.
Correct. I mean, it's at that moment.
At that moment.
I'll come back to your service. You've now 13 years in the service and you've had different roles. But I'm curious, you had a long tenure in districts.
I was there for 5 years.
5 years. And that's, a very critical role in a country like India where the magistrate has a disproportionate amount of influence, especially in rural settings, right? For poverty alleviation, development work. Give us a glimpse of how that life is, because it's not something a lot of us perhaps are, familiar with.
So if you'll permit me, I'll make a small detour. And this
Yes,
is a story.
please.
In fact, this is a story which influenced me a lot in recent years. And this I took from Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Okay.
So and he talks about a monkey trap in the Himalayas, how you catch monkeys. So what happens is you put a basket, a closed basket full of chana,
Okay.
which a monkey likes.
Yeah.
Then you have a hole in it where the monkey can put its paw in and take chana out. The hole is only big enough for the paw to go in, but not for a paw full of chana to come out.
Interesting.
So the monkey puts its hand inside, holds on to the chana, and then finds out its paw can't come outside. A lot of monkeys cannot make that judgment of figuring out, if I let go of my precious chana, I'll get my freedom. So a lot of monkeys are caught. Some monkeys are clever, no doubt, but a lot of monkeys are caught that way. And you asked me about district collectorship, that's what I remember. For me, chana is my previous experience. I worked in the corporate sector, I worked with ISB. So I entered the service with a great, I would say, bias to use every single framework I'd learned. To use everything, put it on the ground. And 2 months into collectorship, I had realized, in fact, I realized it even before, it doesn't work that way. So very reluctantly, I let go of my chanas, which were my all my MBA training, corporate training.
Yeah.
I took my paw out and I started learning from scratch again, because whatever I had learned was for a more structured environment, was for a more predictable environment, was for a more economically self-sufficient environment. This was completely at the other end of the spectrum, where what I learned, and I would say the hard way, is I had to first admit I didn't know anything. So once the admission is the hard part.
That realization is there.
Is the hard part. After that, you have a lot of people to help you.
Sure.
They just want you to ask.
But you also got a public administration award for the work
So
that
there's
you've done.
something called
The PM's
the
award.
PM's award is the biggest award we get.
Correct, as a civil
I
servant.
got the PM's award for 2019 for one district, and for 2020 for another. For Sirsila Siddipet in 19, and Sirsila in 2020.
Tell us a little bit about it, because I know it's, on Civil Services Day, it's the one big thing that everybody aspires as a civil servant to get this
for
recognition.
us working in service, it is the recognition.
The recognition.
And
To
fortunately,
have got it twice, it's a very commendable thing.
I was also lucky that I was in places where there was scope for this to be done. And certainly when it came to public health and immunization, I'm not the expert in immunization. I was the MBA guy. But I had a fantastic team of doctors to guide me on what works and what doesn't. What we did in Siddipet for public health immunization, the scheme ran only for 3 months. So usually government schemes can run for years, if not decades. But it ran only for 3 months. It started in my tenure and ended my tenure.
Yeah, normally it's always multi-tenure.
Multi-tenure.
Yeah.
So I was lucky about that. What happened was we took immunization to the max. This was sometime in 2019. There wasn't much awareness about immunization. COVID hadn't hit yet. What we did was we set ourselves a literally impossible target. The government of India, for its scheme Mission Indradhanush, gave us they said try to get as close to 100% as possible. So we interpreted this from the other side. We went to 105%. And I'll explain to you what happened. That's essentially what got us the award. We figured that because there's a lot of construction activity happening in a district, it's close to Hyderabad. There were a lot of irrigation projects. There were a lot of public projects. There were a lot of homes being built. So in general, people were well-to-do there.
Yeah.
Because of the proximity, there was a lot of work being done. We had a lot of migrant labor. Who weren't on the rolls. So we thought, over and above saturating the entire district, why don't we consider them as well?
Nice.
So we went ahead, we went to the sites where work was happening, we went there, and we almost forcibly, in a way, not for you, ultimately,
But ultimately there's a bit of awareness.
We forcibly built awareness, and
Yeah.
finally they agreed. So we, I think, took it to 104.9%, 105 roughly percent. We were able to saturate it to public campaign. And the second part of what worked and what I think Government of India recognized was, we had funds available with us in 2019 February for elections. The Lok Sabha elections were due in April.
Correct. The general election.
So what we did was, we used all the fund for election campaigning, in the sense, sweep activities, getting awareness for
Voter
people to vote.
awareness. Yeah.
We dovetailed immunization into this. So we didn't need a separate budget. So what we did was all the big activities we did for electioneering, for voting turnout, etc. We added them. Oh, and by the way, get your immunization done. And we added a small skit on it. We added, some sort of tom-tomming. We added 2 or 3 scripts were actually taken very well. We got local actors.
Like the street plays,
street plays and all.
Yeah.
So we had street plays done for voting turnout, for voting awareness, for voting malpractices, for candidate selection, etc. We added this part to it. And sort of, we added these, it became an economy scale as well as scope because people were in the mood to listen.
There was attention is there. And
so these two things allowed us to go over and above 100%. And while my sense is that at some point, people started joining with as much enthusiasm as we started off with.
Yeah.
Sircilla, it was different. Sircilla, it was public grievance redressal. Now, that's a very catch-all concept. What is grievance redressal? So I think the government of India had a team which went and visited many villages and asked people straight out. A very strange way of asking. So I think in our time, when the evaluation happened, some of them figured, rather than asking, are they doing a good job, which people would answer yes, they went with a negative. They're doing a bad job, right? They suck, right? And then they tried to say how many contradicted them.
Interesting.
And then
so it's a leading question in a different way.
Leading question, and their point of view was, if good work has been done, then somebody will make the effort to say, no, you're mistaken.
Vehemently oppose it.
Yeah. So they did that. Then they came and water was one of the things because it was a drought-prone area. A lot of other things were taken up. So like we did a lot of work with the Rural Employment Guarantee Act.
Yeah.
We got a national award for that. There's a national award for that also. We got that. We did a lot of urban work. So that was also recognized at that point of time. So what happened after these two was then they took some sort of a complex index of all these, and then they gave us an award for public grievance redressal. So unfortunately, neither of these years we were able to take the award from the PM because of COVID and because of elections. So we went much after later. But
No, I think it's still, in terms of while the photograph moment may not be there, but the fact that you have that award is something very, very
it's very special. And I have to be very honest and very humble and say both of them are essentially in areas where I wasn't trained for.
In terms of, civil service is also described as the steel frame, Sardar Patel, famously used that phrase. You've seen the civil service evolve. You also have a ringside view as well prior to formally joining the service. How do you think that service is evolving? One, in terms of just its centrality to this country's progress and sort of just everyday governance. And what do you think, therefore, are some of the changes that you perhaps either foresee or would like things to change, if at all?
No. There's always. I think the first point that should be made very clear is the civil services itself is a reflection of society. It is not like, there are people who come from elsewhere.
Outside,
So in all its forms, positive and negative, you will find in the spectrum of civil service as a whole. But having said that, what I do see from the time I've joined till now, there has been a much greater focus on accountability. It used to be a job where you could retire in peace, even if you didn't get much done. I don't think today that's possible because governments, whatever their political color, are demanding accountability. And they are demanding accountability through hard stats, through hard figures on the ground, at the cutting edge.
Data, evidence.
So that's, whether you like it or not, it's seeped in. I'm sure you understand, Jan, people know this very well. You have people who are election consultants, who draw a lot of data, who are very much in demand. But naturally, if it's happening that side, it will happen this side as well.
Correct.
This is not so publicized.
And that brings me to another question that, I'm always curious how civil servants, you work closely with political leadership. That's your job. And, public exercise their option every few years. And, sometimes parties change in terms of government. How is it for you to sort of adjust to, let's say, change in leadership? You're working with people, sometimes publicly at least they're sort of, criticizing previous decisions, but you were in some sense part of some of those decision-making process at some level, right? But what is it that, how do you, create or enable that mindset to say, I have this task, I have to do this and move on and be sort of bereft of all those public, let's say whatever that happens in plays out.
I'm very tempted to quote from Yes Minister. This same question is asked to Sir Humphrey Appleby.
Okay.
Then he says, if I were to change my opinions every time government changed, I'd be a market specialist as well as a socialist. I'd be a pro-education as well as an anti-education. I'll be a pro-infrastructure as well as an anti-infrastructure. I'll be pro-welfare policy against welfare policy. I'll be pro-pensions and against pensions. In short, I'd be a stark, raving lunatic. So
no wonder yes minister is so popular.
I mean, obviously there is exaggeration there.
Sure.
But I think we have to be clear on two matters. The ultimate deciding authorities are our political masters.
Sure.
There is no question about it. And anybody who thinks that they can challenge that assumption is essentially deluding themselves. And I would argue that the extent of political ownership has only increased in recent decades. It's not gone back, it's increased. So because of social media, because of much more,
greater focus, transparency.
People also becoming, their expectations in general going up.
Yeah.
So a politician operates within a series of constraints that are much more challenging than for a civil servant. The constraints we operate under are the constraints of law and of statutory requirement. The politician has those constraints. Over and above that, they have the other political constraints, they have constituency constraints, they have development constraints. So I think it's very fair to say that the constraints they operate under are a far more challenging series of constraints, and that is something to be recognized. And therefore, as a result of having worked with so many constraints, the objective function having so many parameters, their goal-seek function runs for a longer time than us and is more complex than ours. When you realize that, when you understand that the nature of their decision-making apparatus is much more difficult to wield than for us, you do develop a respect for them. And over the years, you also understand the average politician is definitely more intelligent than the average civil servant. I don't think there should be any hesitation accepting that, because the number of decisions they make on a day-to-day basis, on an hour-to-hour basis, on a minute-to-minute, on a second-to-second basis, are of an order of magnitude more than the average civil servant. So some of them are exceptionally intelligent, and they are able to figure out, they play a game of chess, or you could call it Chinese 3D checkers. You want to go ahead and call it AlphaGo. Well, sometimes we just play checkers. So it is unfair to say that some people have negative impressions about the political process as such. But if you look under the hood, you'll see balancing so many aspirations and so many constraints.
No, it's not easy.
It's not easy at all.
Yeah. If I were to ask you, to students who are currently in the class at ISB, what sort of advice would you offer to them?
I'd advise them to be very open about government, because unlike some time ago, government now has economic development as a very clear and explicit priority. So they should be open to the idea of working with government, if only on a short-term basis. It's fine. Even short-term is fine. But there has to be as much cross-pollination as possible.
Got it.
I mean, there should be the reverse as well. I mean, I don't know if government will ever permit it, but in a short-term course, for short-term, people like me, even if we don't work, we should keep ourselves abreast of what's exactly happening elsewhere outside.
One last, in terms of, we spoke about advice to students, but let's say someone who's a prospective applicant says, I want to be an IAS officer, I want to be in the public service in the way you are, but I also want to do an ISB. What would your advice be to someone like who's probably in that, even if it's a minority segment?
So there is this thing, right? Again, in operation, there is this thing called path dependency. The person who comes to civil service and then goes to ISB will have a very different perspective from someone who goes to ISB and then goes into civil services. Neither of them are superior or inferior. Both of them, you have to realize, are different.
Yeah.
The way I come, someone who's in civil services, who's worked in the civil service for 10 years, comes to ISB, will have the greater part of their mental makeup is government. And this will be like an addition on top of it. So that's bread and butter, this is jam. When I entered service, for me, the corporate life was my bread and butter. And of course, the jam kept piling up till it reached this roof. That's a different matter. But what is bread and butter and what is jam differs. And therefore, the quality of the toast you eat also differs. So it's very different. It's very difficult to judge.
Krishna, this has been a wonderful conversation, but I have to now get into our rapid fire segment, excepting there's no gift hamper.
I'm thankful for that.
So I want to ask you, what's your favorite campus memory?
My favorite campus memory, it's a good question. I'll have to think through that. I think my favorite campus memory is DMOP.
Oh, wow.
DMOP, and the second term, around 2:30 or so, our study group came up with the solution to the problem, which we gave up on.
Yeah.
And then to celebrate, we went to the cafe, and then I think we had a cup of coffee. Yeah.
And I don't know if you are aware, but this year onwards, DMOP is an optional subject. It's
How unfortunate is this? I don't agree with it. DMOP is a rite of passage. You have to go through DMOP.
so, but still, there's a lot of people who have taken DMOP.
Oh, great.
So, but it's an optional thing. What are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading 3 books at the moment.
Okay.
So one of them, I'm rereading an old book, which coincidentally I read when I was in ISB.
Okay.
It's called The Logic of Life.
Okay.
It's very nice. Then there's a book by Karen Armstrong. It's called A History of God. Then I'm reading Professor Karthik Muralidharan's book on the Indian state capacity, which came out. So
it's a really...
that's a big book to read.
I know.
It's got more footnotes than the actual book.
I saw the book, some 900 odd pages.
So I think almost 200 or more of them are footnotes. So he promised me that when the paperback comes out, they'll all be exported online. So the book will be much thinner. I think 300 pages of footnotes.
Wow. Okay. What's the one defining change that you'd like to see in society today?
Good question. And it's very difficult to answer it at a moment's notice. What I would like people to compound their actions more. So most of us act in the moment without reference to what we've done earlier. And if we compound our actions, I think we would find it more enriching. So I'm just giving an example.
Yeah.
You maintain something like maintaining a calendar, having some, we most of us, our default mode, and life pushes us that way, or rather corporate life or professional life pushes that way, to treat each instant on its own. But if you're able to compound and link it to the instance before that, the magic happens when things compound over a long term. And that ties up to something I read as a kid and which stayed with me. And this was Pascal. Pascal had said, all the evil in the world comes from man not being able to sit still with himself in a room. That's amazing. And the more I've thought about that quote in the years, the more I realize it's correct. It's essentially that because we're not able to handle boredom, that we create avenues to fulfill our boredom. Some of them can be ethical, some of them may not be ethical. But it's that if everybody in the world were able to compound their lives and sit still comfortably with themselves in a room, there'd be no evil at all. That's a great change I'd like.
Wow. The last thing that you did for the first time?
The last thing which I did for the first time? Wow, that's a great question. I think the last thing I did for the first time was learn how to juggle. About 15 days ago, I'm learning how to juggle.
If you were to describe in one line, one sentence, to you, what does ISB stand for? Or, what is ISB for you?
ISB for me is excellence. Like I said, one of my first memories is being said, 5 years down the line, KMCA is not going to be enough. So let's plan for a new place where we'll have a convocation. So I saw the pursuit of excellence in ISB. I continue to see it. And certainly I'd like to help in any way I can with the further pursuit of it.
Thank you, Krishna. It's been lovely chatting with you. We could go on and on, but I think it's, alums like you who, in some sense, take us as a school to greater heights.
It's very kind of you.
We are very thankful and continue to do well. It's not just the school which will benefit. In your case, as someone who has a significant role to play in the administration in the state of Telangana, and of course, as your career takes you different places, we will be cheering you on from the sidelines.
Thank you
so much.
so much.